You're listening to the Valley Current.
It's Thursday, May 14th, 2026. And if you're watching the news right now, the scene on the tarmac in Beijing looks like a scene straight out of a movie.
Oh, absolutely. It's incredibly cinematic.
Right. You've got the brass bands playing, the 21-gun salutes going off, the red carpets rolled out, and then you see these massive tech billionaires just stepping off Air Force One.
Yeah, it's quite the visual to kick off a summit.
But, if you strip away all that pageantry, all the media spin, and you look at the actual paperwork sitting on the negotiating table between President Trump and President Xi Jinping, it is not a peace treaty.
No, not at all.
It's basically a hostage negotiation, and the collateral is your supply chain.
Yeah, that's a really accurate way to frame it. I mean, what we are witnessing here is the ultimate exercise in tactical realism.
Okay, let's unpack that. Tactical realism.
All right, so this isn't some grand world-saving bargain. It is a highly calibrated, mutually face-saving exchange of tactical deliverables. And they are severely constrained by, domestic politics, recent legal rulings, and obviously the ongoing global conflicts.
Which brings us to the mission for today's deep dive. We are cutting through all that noise to examine the exact 37 items across 12 dossiers that are actually in play right now.
The nuts and bolts of the deal.
Exactly. And our roadmap for this is a hot-off-the-press legal and geopolitical newsletter from Computer Law Group LLP, authored by managing partner Jack Russo. Our goal is to show you, the listener, the definitive zone of possible agreement, or the ZOPA, for this specific 48-hour window.
And just to clarify for those who might not be familiar, negotiators use the term ZOPA to define the absolute outer boundaries of what can realistically be achieved when two sides sit down.
Right, it's what's actually possible, not just what they're saying on TV.
Exactly. It ignores the grand political rhetoric and focuses entirely on the intersection of what the leaders are legally and politically capable of delivering.
Okay, so let's get into it. The contrast between what's happening on camera and what is legally possible back home is just staggering.
It really is night and day.
Let's start with the choreography of day one. You have this CEO delegation stepping off the plane. Elon Musk is there representing EVs and Starlink. Tim Cook is there, basically the heartbeat of the Apple supply chain.
Right.
And Jensen Huang from NVIDIA representing AI silicon. Now, if you are just watching this at home, you might think, oh, wow, this is a massive show of American economic muscle.
Yeah, it looks like a power play.
Yeah.
But in high-stakes diplomacy, choreography is policy. Bringing Musk, Cook, and Huang isn't just about padding the guest list with famous people.
So what is it about?
Those three specific individuals represent the exact tectonic fault lines of the U.S.-China relationship right now. You've got electric vehicles, satellite infrastructure, hardware manufacturing, and advanced semiconductors.
Ah, I see.
Where those CEOs sit in the room tells you exactly what deliverables are currently on the menu.
Wow. And then you have Xi Jinping's opening rhetoric, which sets a very specific historical tone. He actually invoked the concept of a transformation not seen in a century.
Which is a heavy phrase if you know the history.
Totally. Because that phrase traces its roots all the way back to 1872. There was a Qing dynasty official named Li Hongzheng who warned that China was facing, quote, great changes not seen in 3,000 years.
Right. He was lamenting China's situation and pushing for a self-strengthening to survive Western industrialization.
Exactly. So she pairs that deep historical memory with a direct reference to the Thucydides trap, and he's explicitly urging the U.S. to be partners, not rivals.
While Trump, on the other hand, is playing very heavily to his base. He's calling Xi a great leader and talking up the assembled CEOs as the undisputed top 30 in the world.
So how do we make sense of this disconnect, between the sweeping historical rhetoric and the actual narrow reality of the negotiations?
Well, the source material uses the lens of political scientist Robert Putnam. He developed the theory called the two-level game.
The two-level game.
Right. When leaders of this magnitude meet, they are never just negotiating with each other across the table. That's level one. Level two is their respective domestic audiences back home.
So Congress, the regulators, the voters.
Exactly. The legislatures, the military hardliners, the nationalist publics. Every single concession that is offered at level one at that table in Beijing has to be politically survivable at level 2 back home.
It's honestly like a corporate merger where both CEOs are sitting across the boardroom table promising the moon, right? Talking about synergies and dominance.
Right, but secretly.
Secretly, both of them know their own boards of directors are just waiting for an excuse to fire them the second they walk back into headquarters.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And that dynamic introduces another concept pioneered by Thomas Schelling. It's called tying hands.
Tying hands, like intentionally restricting yourself.
Exactly. It's counterintuitive, but having a rigid, unforgiving domestic audience is actually a massive strategic advantage in negotiations.
Wait, really? How does that work?
It allows a leader to credibly claim they cannot make a concession, even if they secretly want to. So Trump can look at Xi and say, I would love to lower tariffs, but my courts and my Congress have physically removed my ability to do so.
I get it. And she can say, I want to guarantee these critical mineral exports, but my Politburo hardliners will oust me if I give up our leverage.
Precisely. The domestic constraint functions as a weapon against the other side.
Okay, but let me push back on that framework for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
If both of these leaders are genuinely that constrained by their domestic audiences, why even bring a guy like Jensen Huang along? I mean, parading the CEO of NVIDIA, the world's most critical AI chip company, it seems like you're promising a massive tech integration deliverable.
Yeah, it does look like that.
If Trump's hands are truly tied, he fundamentally can't follow through on that promise. Isn't that just bad negotiating?
Well, the CEOs are the demand signal. They represent what China wants. Bringing them is a display of the assets in play, the chips sitting on the U.S. side of the table, basically.
Yeah.
But your instinct is spot on. The ability to actually trade those chips has been severely compromised. To grasp what Trump can physically hand over in that room, we have to look at the legal handcuffs placed on him back in Washington.
Right. His unilateral authority has been totally gutted.
Completely. And this is where the source material gets into the mechanical reality of U.S. domestic law, which is honestly the real story here.
Yeah, let's talk about the collapse of IEPA. Because if you are managing a global supply chain, you know that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA, has been the ultimate executive hammer.
Oh, for decades. It was the absolute go-to tool.
But then, on February 20th, 2026, the Supreme Court handed down a 6-3 decision in a case called Learning Resources v. Trump. And that ruling just structurally dismantled the president's authority to impose tariffs under IEPA.
It killed the 10% fentanyl tariff overnight, just wiped it off the board.
Which is wild. So explain the magnitude of that ruling for us.
The Learning Resources decision shifts the entire paradigm of U.S. trade policy. Because, as I said, for decades, IEPA was this massive loophole. It allowed the executive branch to bypass Congress entirely.
Right, you just declare a national emergency.
Exactly, declare an emergency, and suddenly a president could unilaterally slap tariffs on virtually anything overnight. It was the mechanism that allowed trade policy to be conducted via immediate threat, like negotiating by tweet.
But the Supreme Court stepped in and said, no more.
Right. They effectively ruled that the executive branch cannot use emergency powers as a permanent structural tool for macroeconomic trade management.
Which means Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974 is basically the only durable legal lever Trump has left for tariffs.
And the mechanics of Section 301 are entirely different. It is not fast.
Yeah, it requires the U.S. Trade Representative to conduct these formal investigations, right?
Investigations, publications in the Federal Register, lengthy public comment periods. It is a slow, statutory, bureaucratic machine.
So he can no longer threaten an overnight tariff hike to force a concession at the negotiating table.
Exactly. He has lost his tactical speed. If he wants to offer tariff relief to China to secure a deal or threaten new tariffs if talks break down, he is bound by a statutory calendar that moves in months, not hours.
The immediate economic threat is just off the table.
It is. And the legal handcuffs extend far beyond just tariffs.
Yeah, let's look at the defense posture regarding Taiwan. There is a $14 billion arms package currently pending for Taipei.
And we were talking about highly advanced systems here.
Right. PAX-3 MSE interceptors, NASAMS air defense networks, serious hardware. But Trump cannot legally cancel this package, can he?
No, he can't. He is bound by the Taiwan Relations Act and specific stipulations in the 2026 National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, which mandate the provision of defensive articles to Taiwan.
So cancellation is illegal. But the administration is doing something else. They're using a bureaucratic mechanism known as slow rolling.
Right. Slow rolling, it's essentially deliberate stalling.
With gumming up the works.
Exactly. They stall the interagency review process, they delay the formal notification to Congress, and they withhold the final sign-offs required to actually put those weapons on ships.
They are pausing the pipeline so the delivery doesn't blow up the Beijing summit.
Yes, but that slow roll is a massive geopolitical earthquake in itself.
Why is that?
Because it directly violates the spirit of the Six Assurances of 1982.
Ah, okay. Let's dig into that. The Six Assurances, this goes back to the Reagan administration, right?
It does. Back in 82, the U.S. made 6 foundational promises to Taiwan to stabilize the relationship. And one of the absolute core tenets was the assurance that the United States would not consult with Beijing in advance regarding decisions about U.S. arms sales to Taiwan.
Oh, wow. So by explicitly factoring Xi Jinping's political sensitivities into the timing of this $14 billion package.
The timing itself becomes a violation of that doctrine. It signals a major shift in the hierarchy of U.S. priorities.
Just the fact that Washington is willing to delay Taiwan's air defense to secure a bilateral summit with China, that sends a very clear message across the Indo-Pacific.
A very loud message.
Why?
And Taiwan is already doing the math.
Yeah, the newsletter points out that Taiwan's legislature recently approved a special defense supplemental of $24.8 billion, which sounds like a lot, but their president originally requested well over $40 billion.
Right. If the Taiwanese legislature is preemptively trimming its own defense requests, it indicates they are hedging.
They see the slow roll happening.
Exactly. They recognize the U.S. legal and political gridlock, and they are calibrating their own defense posture under the assumption that Washington might be a less reliable supplier over the next couple of years.
Man. And then, as if that's not complicated enough, you add the layer of export controls on technology.
Which is incredibly thorny.
You have NVIDIA's B30A AI chips, currently barred from the Chinese market.
Yeah.
And you have the Bureau of Industry and Security, the BIS, and their affiliates rule.
Which is currently paused, by the way.
Right, paused. But explain what that rule actually does, because it's a huge deal for tech companies.
It's a highly complex regulation.
Yeah.
Basically, it restricts technology transfers not just to blacklisted Chinese companies, but to any entity globally where a blacklisted company holds a 50% beneficial ownership stake.
So even if the company is in, say, Vietnam, if a blacklisted Chinese firm owns half of it, they can't get the tech.
Exactly. The reach is massive.
Okay, so if you step back and look at the American side of the board here, Trump is constrained legally on tariffs by the Supreme Court. He is constrained legislatively on Taiwan by the NDAA, and he is constrained on tech transfers by these deep structural export control frameworks.
His hands are tied in a dozen different legal knots.
Right. So here's where it gets really interesting. If Trump is this constrained, what is the equivalent constraint on Xi Jinping? What is he holding back? What are the levers Beijing actually controls?
Well, Xi's leverage isn't found in legal loopholes. His leverage is locked in the physical earth, and it is actively burning in the Middle East.
Okay, let's examine the material leverage first. The newsletter refers to it as the master key,
which is China's dominance over rare earth elements, specifically the processing and refining of those elements.
Right. We often talk about rare earths as a mining issue, like pulling dirt out of the ground.
But the real choke point is metallurgical processing. China controls roughly 90% of the global output for refined rare earths, and more critically, between 90 and 94% of the production of NdFeB magnets.
NdFeB magnets, neodymium iron boron magnets.
Yes, and without those specific magnets, you do not have an electric vehicle industry. You do not have offshore wind turbines. And fundamentally, you do not have a modern defense industrial base.
Wait, really? The defense industry relies on them that heavily?
Oh, completely. The actuators in an F-35 fighter jet, the guidance fins on precision munitions, they all require these specific high-performance magnets because of their strength-to-weight ratio and heat resistance.
And last October, China's Ministry of Commerce, MOFCOM, they really flexed this muscle. They rolled out this incredibly aggressive, extraterritorial export control regime specifically targeting these materials.
But then they almost immediately suspended it.
Right. They paused the implementation through November 10th, 2026.
And that pause not repeal strategy is, frankly, the most sophisticated form of economic statecraft.
How so?
Think about it. If Xi outright bans the export of neodymium magnets, what happens? He triggers an immediate, unified, and massively funded Western effort to build alternative supply chains, regardless of the cost.
Right. The U.S. and Europe would just throw billions at the problem until it was solved.
Exactly. But by merely pausing the ban, he keeps Western supply chains dependent on Chinese materials.
It functions exactly like an adjustable rate mortgage.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
You get a low teaser rate today, and it feels like relief, right? You can afford the house. But the systemic risk hasn't disappeared. It has entirely transferred onto your balance sheet. You know that at any moment, the political climate could shift, the rate could adjust, and you could be completely underwater with like a 90-day notice.
That is a very precise analogy. She isn't giving the U.S. a gift. He's keeping the U.S. defense base on an adjustable rate lease. The suspension preserves his optionality.
So his single highest value concession at the summit cost him absolutely zero capital.
Zero. He doesn't have to surrender territory. He doesn't have to alter his domestic policy. All he has to do is extend that pause from November 2026 into late 2027.
Yeah.
It allows the U.S. defense base to keep functioning, and in return, he extracts maximum political capital from Washington.
Wow. But the rare earth leverage is just the physical side of things. The geopolitical leverage is centered squarely in the Middle East, which is really the backdrop hanging over this entire summit.
Is the elephant in the room.
Yeah. So the source document provides the current state of play. The U.S. and Israel are in the third month of a major conflict with Iran designated Operation Epic Fury, which escalated in late February 2026.
And obviously, we're just analyzing the geopolitical and economic fallout of this based on the newsletter.
Right, exactly. We're strictly looking at how this impacts the leverage at the table. And the immediate fallout was Iran moving to close the Strait of Hormuz in March. The impact on global energy markets was instantaneous. The newsletter notes Dubai crude spiking to a record $166 a barrel.
Which is just punishing for the global economy.
Right.
And this is where the geopolitical map intersects directly with the economic reality in Beijing.
Right, because gasoline prices cross $5, $6 a gallon in the United States, which creates massive domestic political blowback for the administration.
While China sits in a very unique position, China is the primary buyer of Iranian crude.
They purchase roughly 90% of Iran's oil exports, right?
Yes, often utilizing a dark fleet and routing the shipments through places like Malaysia to obscure the origin. Because China is the singular economic lifeline keeping the Iranian state solvent, Xi Jinping holds immense diplomatic leverage in Tehran.
The Iranian economy essentially functions at his discretion.
Precisely. And the newsletter highlights a crucial detail. The Iranian foreign minister was actually in Beijing just a week prior to this summit.
Oh, wow. That is textbook signaling.
It really is.
Yeah.
She is walking into the Great Hall of the People, projecting a very specific capability to Trump. He's basically saying, you have an oil crisis that is destroying your domestic political standing. I hold the keys to Tehran. I can broker a de-escalation.
But he isn't going to deploy that kind of high-value geopolitical capital for, like, agricultural purchases.
No, absolutely not.
Which brings us to a crucial distinction the newsletter makes between easy giveaways and the actual structural trades. Let's look at the easy stuff first.
The low-hanging fruit.
Yeah. U.S. liquid natural gas, or LNG, exports to China absolutely cratered. They went from over 4 million tons in 2024 to a mere 26,000 tons in 2025, a 99.4% collapse.
It's just a total drop-off.
And Boeing hasn't secured a major Chinese commercial aircraft order since 2017.
So, on paper, returning LNG flows to 2024 levels or signing a contract for 150 Boeing 737 MAX aircraft, those look like massive victories for the U.S. negotiating team.
Right. They are billion-dollar headline numbers that play incredibly well in the press. But wait, if the Strait of Hormuz is closed and Asian LNG spot prices are going through the roof due to the conflict, isn't China buying U.S. LNG just common sense economics for them?
It absolutely is.
They have an energy deficit, U.S. producers have the gas, and the Chinese economy needs to run. Why should the U.S. treat China buying our energy or our soybeans as a major concession if China is simply buying what it desperately needs anyway?
Because of the level 2 game we talked about earlier. Those easy purchases give Trump exactly what he needs for his domestic audience back home. Visible, easily digestible dollar figure victories that support the American agricultural and manufacturing bases.
Ah, I see. So Xi gets the energy security he requires, and Trump gets the political narrative he needs.
Exactly. It's a win-win on the surface. But you are entirely correct. Those transactions do not alter the strategic balance of power in the Pacific or the Middle East.
Right.
To understand how the deep structural conflicts are managed, we have to examine the specific linkage map the negotiators are using.
Okay, so if Xi won't trade his Middle Eastern leverage for cheap soybeans, and Trump legally can't offer structural tariff relief because of the Supreme Court, how do they actually make a deal? What is the currency they are trading?
The newsletter lays out 3 specific linkage trades. So let's break down the mechanics.
All right, trade 1, which the source assigns a high probability. The U.S. formalizes the slow roll of the $14 billion Taiwan arms package. In exchange, China extends the MOFCOM rare earth export pause through November 2027.
This is a direct exchange of hard power constraints.
Yeah.
The mechanics are straightforward, but obviously highly sensitive. Washington quietly limits the flow of advanced interceptors to the Taiwan Strait,
which provides Xi with a significant domestic victory to present to his Politburo. He can say he successfully deterred American militarization of what China considers its sovereign territory.
Right, and in return, China keeps the tap open on the neodymium magnets flowing into U.S. defense contractors.
So the U.S. trades a delay in Taiwanese defense architecture for the physical materials necessary to build its own weapons.
Exactly. It's a brutal sort of pragmatism.
Then we have trade 2, also rated high probability. And this targets the economic friction. The U.S. grants specific Section 301 quota carve-outs, basically navigating that slow USTR bureaucratic process to provide targeted tariff relief on essential components.
And in exchange, China commits to a massive Phase 1 style headline purchase tranche. The 100 to 200 Boeing aircraft, 25 million metric tons of soybeans, and the restoration of those LNG shipments.
This trade feels like the definition of a political band-aid.
It is. The U.S. uses the complex statutory carve-out process to lower costs on specific industrial inputs that U.S. manufacturers are begging for, but without officially lowering the broader tariff wall.
So they get to keep the tough-on-trade narrative while giving their manufacturers a break.
Right. And China, acting through its state-owned enterprises, directs the bulk purchases of American exports. It is managed trade designed strictly for press releases and short-term economic stabilization.
Okay, and then we reach trade 3, which is fascinating, marked as medium probability. The U.S. grants a tranche of licenses allowing NVIDIA AI chips, specifically the B30A models, to bypass export controls and enter the Chinese market.
Right, and in exchange, China leverages its economic hold over Iran to broker an ambiguous ceasefire framework regarding Operation Epic Fury.
The operative word there is ambiguous.
Oh, very much so. The mechanics of this trade really highlight the profound verifiability gap between the two nations.
The verifiability gap. Tell me more about that.
Well, when China commits to purchasing 25 million tons of soybeans, verification is a matter of basic accounting. You check the bills of lading at the ports in Seattle or New Orleans. The data is empirical.
You can physically count the beans.
Exactly. But how do you verify a ceasefire framework? You are asking the U.S. to hand over tangible world-leading AI hardware that fundamentally advances China's computing dominance in exchange for a diplomatic promise regarding a third-party conflict in the Middle East.
Which is incredibly risky. And that verifiability gap brings us to the ghost haunting every conversation in Beijing right now.
Wow.
Absolute failure of the 2020 Phase 1 trade deal.
It really casts a long shadow over everything.
When you look at the actual fulfillment data compiled in the newsletter, it is just staggering. Under that 2020 agreement, China was legally obligated to purchase $200 billion of additional U.S. goods over 2 years.
Right, above baseline levels.
But the final fulfillment rate was only 58% of the baseline targets. For aircraft, they only hit 18% of the goal. For autos, 39%.
And of the extra $200 billion they promised to buy,
They bought precisely 0%.
zero. The foundational trust required for bilateral agreements just no longer exists. Neither side believes a signed pledge holds any weight.
So what do? Traditionally, when bilateral trust breaks down, nations rely on international institutions.
Normally, yes. But the World Trade Organization's enforcement mechanism is basically paralyzed. The WTO appellate body has been functionally dead since 2019 because the U.S. blocked the appointment of new judges.
Wow. I didn't realize that. So you literally cannot take a dispute to an international court because the court doesn't exist.
Exactly. Which forces them to invent an entirely new enforcement architecture for this deal. The newsletter states the administration intends to roll out a U.S.-China Board of Trade.
Which sounds very official, but the mechanics of this are wild. It's a government-to-government oversight body that relies on strict quotas, voluntary export restraints, and quarterly procurement attestations.
It is a stunning reversal of 50 years of American trade philosophy.
Really? How so?
Well, the U.S. historically championed open markets, free enterprise, multilateral rules. A board of trade utilizing quarterly attestations is a total regression to 1980s style managed trade.
So the free market is taking a back seat.
Completely. It means that the flow of goods across the Pacific is no longer determined by market demand or price discovery. It is determined by political bureaucrats in Washington and Beijing sitting in a room every 90 days reviewing spreadsheets to ensure quotas are met.
So what does this all mean? I mean, if the 2020 deal failed so spectacularly at 58%, why would either side trust a Board of Trade to actually work this time? What makes a quarterly attestation any more binding than a signed international agreement?
That is the crucial insight here. They don't trust it to work permanently.
They don't.
No one in that room believes the Board of Trade is a durable architecture for 21st century commerce. They just need it to function as a shock absorber. It allows both governments to modulate tariffs and purchases based on immediate short-term milestones. It's a mechanism to manage the friction just long enough for both leaders to survive their upcoming domestic political cycles.
Which brings us directly to you, the listener. Because if you are managing a global supply chain, if you are a corporate compliance officer or an institutional investor, you cannot operate on the assumption that this summit is producing a stable, long-term equilibrium.
You'd be setting yourself up for failure.
Exactly. The newsletter lays out very stark, actionable realities for navigating this ZOPay. Let's start with electric vehicle tariffs. If you are an automaker relying on the hope that the 100% tariff on Chinese EVs will be reduced as part of a diplomatic thaw, you need to abandon that strategy immediately.
Yes. The domestic politics surrounding EV manufacturing in the U.S. make those tariffs entirely inert. They aren't moving.
Why are they so untouchable?
The newsletter points out that the United Auto Workers Coalition and the broader U.S. manufacturing base are in absolute alignment on this issue. Stripping those tariffs away is political suicide before a midterm election. The 100% wall is permanent for the foreseeable future.
Got it. And that reality feeds directly into the critical minerals risk. If your manufacturing process requires those NdFeB magnets, gallium or germanium, you are currently operating in the eye of the hurricane. The source advises that you must secure non-PRC sourcing by the third quarter of 2026.
Right, because as we discussed, the MOF-TOM rare earth export controls are merely paused.
The adjustable rate mortgage.
Exactly. If you treat that pause as a resolution, you are leaving your entire production line exposed to a 90-day weaponization window. You have until Q3 2026 to qualify alternative suppliers.
So what should companies be doing right now?
The newsletter specifically highlights the need to engage with companies like Lynas Rare Earths, or MP Materials, who are actively building out refining capacity outside of China's jurisdiction.
It's going to be expensive, though, isn't it?
Oh, the cost of transitioning supply chains will be very high. But the cost of remaining dependent on a paused export ban is existential. It could wipe you out.
Wow. And then we have to look at the affiliates rule. If you're managing export compliance and you think you're safe simply because you aren't selling directly to a listed Chinese entity, this paused BIS rule is your massive blind spot.
Yes, you have to trace the beneficial ownership of your counterparties.
So explain why that is so dangerous for companies right now.
The mechanics of the affiliates rule are punishing. As we said, if you sell advanced technology to a seemingly benign company in Singapore or Vietnam, but a U.S. blacklisted Chinese entity holds a 50% beneficial ownership stake in that company, you are in violation of U.S. export controls.
Even if you didn't know.
You are expected to know. And the pause on this rule is temporary. Companies must use this window to conduct exhaustive, deep-tier diligence on the corporate structures of every single counterparty they engage with. You have to assume the loophole will close.
You have to assume the worst. And the reason you have to assume the worst is because the structural divergence between the two nations is just locked into the legal code.
It's baked in.
The newsletter relies on two strategic frameworks to explain this. First, you have Rush Doshi's concept of China's sequenced grand strategy.
Right, which is the idea that Beijing is systematically moving through phases of blunt, build, and expand to displace U.S. hegemony.
And second, there's Aaron Friedberg's diagnosis of China's durable revisionism. Basically, the underlying conflict over who dominates AI, who controls semiconductor manufacturing, and who dictates the future of the EV transition, that conflict is not resolvable over a 48-hour summit with brass bands.
No, the divergence is too deep. And it has been codified into the bedrock of U.S. law.
The newsletter details the sheer complexity of this new statutory landscape. You have OBBA, the Outbound Investment Transparency Act, which strictly regulates U.S. capital flowing into Chinese tech sectors.
And you have the FEOC rules, the Foreign Entity of Concern designations under the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah, let's break down the mechanics of those EFOC rules, because they show exactly how deeply this conflict is entrenched. How does a Foreign Entity of Concern designation actually prevent geopolitical maneuvering?
It operates directly through the tax code. If an American automaker wants their electric vehicles to qualify for lucrative federal tax credits, their battery supply chain cannot contain critical minerals extracted, processed, or recycled by a foreign entity of concern.
And the statute is rigid on that.
Very rigid. The newsletter cites a specific provision, Internal Revenue Code Section 7701A51. This legal architecture means that even if Trump and Xi shake hands in Beijing and publicly agree to cooperate on climate technology and battery licensing, U.S. statutory law actively prevents the Treasury Department from waiving the rules.
So they literally can't allow Chinese battery components into the subsidized U.S. market, even if the president wanted to.
Exactly. The hostility isn't just policy anymore. It is statutorily entrenched tax law.
Man. It is the equivalent of getting a weather report stating that a Category 5 hurricane heading for your supply chain has temporarily stalled off the coast, but the atmospheric models guarantee it will make landfall in exactly 18 months.
Right.
You don't take the pause as a sign to go to the beach and throw a party. You buy plywood. You reinforce the foundation. You assume the hit is coming.
The pause is an opportunity to build resilience, not an excuse to relax. The deliverables emerging from this summit are not the foundation of a new global order. They constitute a highly specific, tactical truce with a strictly defined expiration date.
Which brings us to the final tally of this 48-hour window.
Yeah.
If we strip away the rhetoric, the Thucydides trap references, the CEO photo ops, what are the actual bullet points sitting on the table?
Well, we have the extension of the rare earth export pause. We have the Board of Trade managing bulk purchases of Boeing planes, beef, soybeans, and LNG.
We have the bureaucratic slow roll of Taiwan's defensive arms, minor compliance agreements regarding fentanyl precursors, and ambiguous diplomatic frameworks regarding Iranian mediation in exchange for targeted AI chip licenses.
Right. There is no grand bargain. It is just a menu of calibrated, face-saving tactics.
But, if you look closely at that menu, there is a singular data point that reveals the true nature of this summit. Look at the timeline. The BIS affiliates rule pause. It expires November 9th, 2026.
And the MOFCOM rare earth export pause. It expires November 10th, 2026.
Almost every critical suspension of hostilities is anchored to that specific week in November.
Exactly. And what happens that week?
The United States midterm elections are on Tuesday, November 3, 2026. The expiration dates for this entire geopolitical truce fall in the immediate chaotic aftermath of the U.S. political cycle.
Xi Jinping and Donald Trump are not negotiating a permanent economic architecture. They have surveyed the global map, recognized their respective vulnerabilities, and mutually agreed to hit the pause button on structural economic warfare, but only until the political map of the United States is redrawn.
So they are both holding their breath, basically.
Yes. Waiting to see who controls the legislature, who holds the investigative committees, and what the true balance of power will be. The most vital question isn't what they agree to today in Beijing. The question you should be asking is, what happens to your supply chain on November 11th when the pause expires and the political reality shifts?
That is a chilling strategic reality to end on. You survived the summit just to brace for the political fallout of the midterms.
Indeed.
For everyone listening, the directive is clear. Use this manufactured pause to audit your exposure. Dig into the beneficial ownership of your suppliers, secure your non-PRC critical minerals, and start buying that plywood. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.